I dig a pit or put some sort of stumbling block in a public area, then the Torah says that I have to pay damages if someone falls into the bar. Now, it's complicated because it depends how deep the pit is. The classical bar is 10 tfachim. It's 10 tfachim deep. And if that be the case, then if an animal falls into the bar, I have to pay the damages that the owner of the animal suffers. But if the bar is 9 tfachim, then the halacha makes the following distinction. If the animal dies in the bar, I don't have to pay damages. If it breaks a leg or other injuries, then I do have to pay damages. So when
what's this for?
Oh, so what's this for? So the Gemara says, if you take a look at your page, the Gemara says that on the second line, Kim lehu l'Rabbanon, Asara avdin misa tes nezikin avdi misa lo avdi. Which means that the Rabbanon made an assumption that if the bar is 10 tfachim deep, then the animal might die as a result of the fall and the crash on the bottom of the bar. But if the bar is only 9 tfachim deep, then although the animal might get injured, it might scratch itself, even break a leg or a limb, but it wouldn't die.
And if it did die, it's not because of the bar?
So that's the question. No, now you're touching on the real issue. What does this mean? Now let's say the bar was 9 tfachim, the animal fell in and died. What are we assuming? Are we assuming that it's absolutely impossible for the bar to be responsible for the death of the animal? Or are we assuming that it's unlikely, and even if it did occur, the Torah sets up a standard and says, well, since in most cases, what we call darko bakach, the animal wouldn't die as a result of the fall in the bar, therefore you don't pay damage. So let's go over the two possibilities and read it inside the Gemara. The Gemara says this, Tolda debar ma'nihu. Every one of the 4 avos nezikim, the Mishnah at the beginning of Bava Kama starts with 4 major categories of damages. Every one of them has what's called a tolda. That's a secondary kind of case. It's not the case that the Torah describes in Parshas Mishpat in the Parsha Nezikim. It's a secondary. It's an offshoot. Correct? So what's the told of a bar? So the Gemara says, Ilema av yud v'tolda tes. Maybe you'll say that the av that the Torah describes is 10 tfachim. It's 10 tfachim deep. The tolda would be a bar that's only 9 tfachim deep. The Gemara says, Lo tes ksivi, v'lo yid ksivi. The Torah doesn't tell us how deep the bar is. Now, an av has to be written in the Torah, and a tolda is not explicit in the Torah. But in this case, the Torah doesn't make that distinction between 10 and 9. So the Gemara says, Holo kasha, that's not a problem. I can still maintain that the bar, the av of bar, is 10 tfachim. Why? Because the Torah says in the Parsha Bar, Vahameis yelo. In other words, the animal fell into the bar and died. Omar Achmana, that's what it says in the Torah. V'kimlu l'Rabbanan yud avdin misa tes nezikin avdin misa lo avdin. And the Rabbanan know that if this bar killed the animal, it must be a bar that's 10 tfachim deep. If it wasn't 10 tfachim, the animal wouldn't die. That's just on a superficial level. That's what it says in the Gemara. So therefore the Gemara comes to the conclusion that the bar that's written in the Torah is 10 tfachim, and the owner of that bar will pay damages whether the animal broke a leg or died in the bar. A told of bar would be the case of a bar that's only 9 tfachim deep, and here the owner of the bar will pay damages, but he won't pay for the death of the animal.
If the animal dies, will he pay the damages to the animal?
It doesn't seem like he even pays damages, but that's an issue beyond beyond our discussion. What
so
we want to focus
he has no liability.
Yeah. Oh, so the Gemara says, the Gemara says, even after your explanation, we're still not happy about it. Why? Zeh avla misa v'zeh avla nezikin. When the Torah describes the case of a bar, it relates to two possibilities. Either the animal fell into the bar and died, or the animal fell into the bar and got injured. In the case of a bar that's 10 tvachim, that's the av for the death of the animal in the bar. In the case of the bar that's only 9 tvachim, that's the av for nezikin. So let's look at Rashi, which I have for you on the top of your page. Rashi says, Ze av lenezikin, she'im nafal shor bebar, right, an animal, an ox in this case, fell into the bar. Tisha, if the bar is 9 tvachim, umes, and the shar died at the bottom of the bar, pater bal habar. The Baal Bar doesn't pay damages in this case. V'im huzak, but if the shar was injured, chayav, then the owner of the bar has to pay damages. And now Rashi says the following. Rashi says, V'avhu, and this case is the case of an av, meaning if the animal was injured in the bar, that's an av. Da'amidiyuka dekra nafka. We can derive it from the pasuk. How? Midechsiv, the Torah says, Vamesi alo. In the case where what? Where the animal died. Demashma bar asara. It indicates that we're talking about a case of a bar that's 10 tvachim deep. The bar maktil, who it's capable of killing the animal. Chayav b'misas hashar. Ha batzir mihachi. If it would have been less than 10 tvachim deep, b'misa lo chayav. He doesn't pay for the death of the animal. Ha b'nezikin, implying that in the case of nezikin, the animal is damaged. Mischayav. So Rashi presents that both the case of a bar 10 and the case of a bar 9 are written in the parsha. Lishnachrina. Now Rashi has a different approach.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Sof sof ze av lemisa, v'ze av lenezikin. Again, Rashi's re-quoting the Gemara, the language of the Gemara, but now he's reinterpreting it. He says, "Techihechi dinafik lon nikra bar asar lemisa, nafkalon bar tes lenezikin. Tichsiv v'nafal shama shar o chamar, mashma bein mes bein huzak bal habar yishali. Umiu in mes hashar amar abonin bibar tisha patur." De lo machmas habar mes, di ein bo k'dei lahamis, aval huzak chayav, de bar tisha bar nezikin hu. So, what's the difference between the first lashon of Rashi, before the words v'lishnachrina, and the second lashon of Rashi, after the words v'lishnachrina? In fact, both lashonos of Rashi sound identical, but perhaps we could suggest the following. That according to the first lishon of Rashi, a bar tes could cause the animal's death. But it's not something regular, it's not something anticipated. Whereas according to the second lishna, as Rashi emphasized, if you'll see the last few words in Rashi, lav machmas habar mes. If the animal died on the bottom of the bar, and the bar is 9 tvachim, then it didn't die as a result of the bar. There were some other factors that caused its death. So David, getting back to your question, why did the animal die in a bar tes? According to Rashi's first interpretation, it was kind of, let's call it a freak or unusual case. According to Rashi's second interpretation, you've got to find, send the carcass to the to forensic medicine, and figure out what caused the death of the animal.
There's a few very troubling things. The factors in the animal's death, as it's been described now, is limited specifically to the depth of the hole. And it's a very, very fine differential. It's 4 inches, right? What's it depth?
Yeah, let's say 4 inches, 4 to 6.
So it's very, very fine measurement we're really talking about. It's one maximum 5% difference in the depth. There's no discussion about the angle of the walls. There's no discussion of the weight of the animal. Right. So if a heavier animal falls a shorter distance, the momentum and the impact, the likeliness of killing him is probably the same as if a lighter animal falls a greater distance. And we're talking about a 5% difference. So it's hard for me to understand, except to say to myself, as the law often has to do, we'll draw a line someplace.
Right.
So we're drawing the line here. But in fact, it may not be just.
So I think that your question really lies behind the two Lashonos of Rashi. The second Lashon of Rashi is where your problem arises, because Rashi says, Lav machmas habarmes. And you point out very well, let's check that out. There are many different factors. The first Lashon of Rashi doesn't go far as to say, the first Lashon of Rashi says that the one who dug the bar, what does he anticipate, so to speak, or what is the responsibility level as far as this bar that's only 9 tefachim deep? And we're assuming that in most cases it's not going to cause the death of the animal. So I think that this might be, first, before I go on, I wanted to point out to you Tosfos in Bava Kama Daf Yud, which is the second source of your page. We're not going to go through the whole Tosfos, but I underlined one section of the Tosfos I think is very relevant. He says, Bibar, de pachos miyud potter mimisa, in a case of bar that's less than 10 tefachim deep, you don't pay damages if the shard dies. Kevon, look at that. The ein regilus lahamis bipachos miyud. It's not regular, it's not commonplace for a bar that's only 9 tefachim to kill the animal. That doesn't sound at all like Rashi's Lishna Achrina, the second Lishna of Rashi, who says Lav machmas habarmes. Do you see how those formulations are radically different? Whereas Tosfos' formulation is ein regilus lahamis. It's not something that we expect to happen. Rashi's formulation in the second Lishna is that when the animal is dead, lying in the bottom of the bar, we have to figure out why it died, but it's not because of the bar. So basically, we could assume then that the way we interpreted the two Lashonos of Rashi, Tosfos accepts the first Lashon of Rashi, which means that the death of the animal in a bar pachos miyud is not rugil. It's not something that we anticipate should happen. Now, why do I introduce this sugya? How does this give us what I call a tool for Brisk? Because I think we're dealing with two different issues based on the two Lashonos of Rashi. In Rashi's first Lashon, we're dealing with a halachic definition of a bar. We admit, without denying it, that the animal died as a result of the bar. But what we're saying is that since it's ain't no rugil, therefore the Torah legally defines that bar in a different category. The 9 tefachim deep bar is categorized as a bar which cannot be responsible for Misa, even though in this particular exceptional case the animal did die as a result of the fall in the bar. So then we have this legal definition of the bar. According to Rashi's second Lishna, the Torah is really just telling us something about nature, something about reality. Again, as difficult as it is within, notwithstanding your questions, but that Rashi is saying, Lav machmas habar mes, it didn't die as a result of the fall, then you're dealing with what I call a mitzius or a hechetimtzi. You're dealing with some sort of physical reality, not with a legal reality, not with a legal status. So I thought that there might be a nafkamina, a difference in halacha between the two definitions of a bar tes. What happens if Ruvain digs a bar tes? Shimon digs one extra tefach. He makes it from a bar tes to a bar yud. Now, intuitively, we would say that Reuven and Shimon both have to share the damages. But according to many Rishonim, which I don't know if we'll get to inside, so you'll have to trust me on that, these are two separate boros. The original bar that was 9 tefachim is completely gone. It's been replaced by a new bar. And who created the second bar? Shimon. When Shimon digs the extra tefach, he creates a brand new bar. The old bar that's 9 tefachim deep no longer exists. Now that makes sense if you assume that the status of a bar tes vis-a-vis misa is a question of halacha. It's a definition of the bar. So there's something called the bar tes and there's something called the bar yud. The one who created the bar yud is responsible. So when the second one comes along, the Gemara says, Nistalek Meiser Rishon. Reuven, who dug it 9 tefachim, is completely exempt from damages because these are 2 boros. Now that makes sense if the status of a bar tes vis-a-vis misa was a halachic status. But if it was just a reality, meaning we don't assume the animal died as a result of the 9 tefachim, well, Reuven contributed, Shimon added another tefach. Why not divvy up the payment of damages, because they both have responsibility for this bar? The concept of Nistalik Meiser Rishon, that the first one is out and there's a new bar that didn't exist previously as a result of Reuven's action, would seem to indicate that there's some sort of halachic status to the bar tes, and it gains one status and now it's been replaced by another status. Okay, let's talk about a concept in halacha called mizigas hakos. Now, in modern Hebrew, mizigas hakos means pouring a cup. But in halachic terms, mizigas hakos, as used in the Talmud, means to take concentrated wine and mix it with water. Because the concentrated wine was not drinkable; it was too strong. And you'd have to dilute it with water. Now take a look at the Rambam that I have here. It's the 4th source on your page. In Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, at the beginning of Perek Ches.
I thought you were going to come to that.
The Rambam speaks about Sidur Asiyas Mitzvos Elu Belel Chamishasar. And basically the Rambam sets up what we call the Seder. And the first part of the Seder is the first cup of the 4 cups of wine, what we call Kaddish. Now we know, this is based on a Trumas Hadesha, which is brought down in Shulchan Aruch, that the first kos has to be drunk at night. What do I mean at night? You can accept upon yourself Yontif when it's still light out. That's called Kabbalas Tosefes Yontif. But you can't make Kiddush. Sukkot you can make Kiddush, Shavuos you can make Kiddush, but not Pesach. Pesach requires Laila. Now, the Rambam, when he introduces Seder Asiyos Mitzvos Ha'elu B'Laila, he's telling us what do you have to do step by step once it's nightfall. He's not telling us what you do before nightfall. So let me ask you a question. Just shoot from the hip. Don't try to outthink me, if you will. And when would you say that you should dilute the wine by adding water? Does that have to be at night, or could it be during the day?
I would have said you could do it in preparation.
I would have said you could do it during the day. I mean, what difference does it make when you prepare the wine? But take a look at the Rambam. The Rambam says, Seder Asiyos Mitzvos Elu Belel Chamishasar Kaf. B'tchila, the first thing you should do, and the word b'tchila is very meaningful because it tells you what's the first thing in the Seder, which starts at night. Mozgin kos l'chol echad v'echad. Which again means, in the Rambam's context, we dilute the kos. Why are we doing it at night? Why is it part of the Seder? So my Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik was very meticulous about reading this Rambam, and he suggested that mezigas hakos, meaning diluting concentrated wine, is not just a hechatim, as we would say. It's not just a physical reality that we have to set up a kos that's drinkable. No, it's part and parcel of the mitzvah of the brach on the kos. And he had a very interesting proof for this. He quoted the Rambam in Hilchos Brachos. The Rambam says, this is in Perek Zayin Halacha Tesvav, that during the course of Birkat HaMazon, if we have a kos for the bracha of the Birkas HaMazon, we should do the meziga. Not before the Birkas HaMazon, but rather the mezigas hakos should be integrated into the Birkas HaMazon. And the Rambam goes into great detail as to exactly when you should add the water to the wine to dilute it. Says the Rav, why? Apparently, whenever a kos is used as a kosher bracha, the creation of the kos through meziga by using water and diluting the wine, the concentrated wine, is part of the mitzvah of a kosher bracha. Since the first of the 4 kosos on Leil Pesach is the kos of Kiddush, in other words, a kos of wine on which we recite a bracha, the laws of kosher bracha kick in. But here they become part of the mitzvah of the Daled Kosos, insofar as the first kos is one of the 4 kosos, and therefore the Rav said the meziga should take place at night, and the Rambam says Seder Asiyasod B'tchila Mosgin Lo Kos. Once again, we see this methodology repeating itself, that sometimes what we think is just a hechatim, so it's just a description of reality, goes beyond that, and it's a halachic legal entity, or it's an action that has a status in halacha. I want to talk to you a little bit about a topic which people don't usually discuss, and that's the Urim V'Tumim. If you take a look at the Rambam in Hilchos Beis HaBechira at the beginning of the 4th perek, the Rambam says that there's a fundamental difference between the Urim V'Tumim during the first bias and during the second. He says that during the second bias, they didn't have the Ruach HaKodesh that would facilitate asking questions and getting answers for the Urim V'Tumim. There were technical reasons why the Urim V'Tumim was nevertheless worn as part of the Big Day Kahuna. But as far as what we call She'elu Tshuva, to get a question and an answer back, we didn't have the Ruach HaKodesh that would allow us to get the answers from the Urim V'Tumim. In the Bayis Rishon we did, in the Bayis Sheni we didn't. And that's a Gemara at the end of the 2nd perek of Yuma. The Rambam says, take a look, if you read the Rambam carefully, he says, "V'af Urim V'Tumim shahayu b'bayis sheni lo hayu meshivin b'ruach hakodesh." They couldn't get an answer because they didn't have the ruach hakodesh. And then look what the Rambam says afterwards: "V'lo hayu nisholim bahem," and they didn't ask a question to the Urim V'Tumim. Does that sound a little strange to you? The Rambam just told me that you won't get an answer from the Urim V'Tumim. Now he tells me what?
Well, they didn't ask questions. They're repeating.
Isn't that completely superfluous? Well, what does the Rambam have to tell me that they didn't ask questions to the Urim V'Tumim if they couldn't get answers anyway? And the plot grows thicker. The Rambam proves this point. Shenemar ad amon kohen l'Urim V'Tumim. The Rambam feels compelled to quote a pasuk to prove that they didn't ask any questions to the Urim V'Tumim. What does he need a pasuk for? If they didn't have Ruach HaKodesh, there was no point. It would have been an exercise in futility to ask the Urim V'Tumim a question. If you don't have Ruach HaKodesh, you can't get an answer. So I have here a sefer which is kind of new, but still somewhat rare. It's called Chidushei Hagram V'Hagrid, and it's sort of like a joint effort. Half of the Divrei Torah from Rav Moshe Soloveitchik and half from my Rebbe, the Rav. And sometimes it's not always 100% clear who wrote what, because they used to work together on these sugyas. In this case, it's quite clear that it's the Rav's Chiddush. And he says the following. I want to read you the language because it's so fascinating that it's a perfect example of what we're doing tonight in the tools of Brisk. He says the following. Harama bahachta lo hayu nisholim dina nokat. He's telling me a din. It's not just a lack in the reality of it, it would be pointless. Halachically, she'ela is completely null and void with regard to the Urim V'Tumim in Bayis Sheni. V'zeu shehevi Rambam raya me'akra ad amon kohen l'Urim V'Tumim the ad yemos HaMashiach leka mitzvah she'ela b'Urim V'Tumim kla. So what's the difference between saying that there's no she'ela because in Hechatim's it's pointless, it's not going to get you anywhere, or saying that there's no she'ela because it's hufkal pidin, it's completely null and void halachically? What's the difference? So it's fascinating. He quotes Rabbeinu Yonah in Masechta Sanhedrin. The Gemara says in Masechta Sanhedrin that when the Jewish people go out to battle, they can only do so after they get reshus, they request permission from the Urim V'Tumim. Ein yotzim milchama el al pi Urim V'Tumim. So Gemara in Sanhedrin Tes Zayin. So Rabbeinu Yonah, in his commentary on Sanhedrin, asks the following question: Hey chayed noeg din milchama b'ayisheni holeka Urim V'Tumim. How did they go out to battle during Bayesheni? There was no Urim V'Tumim during Bayesheni. What's Rabbeinu Yonah's answer? He says, "The Bayesheni delo hayu Urim V'Tumim naga milchama afilu below Urim V'Tumim." Since they didn't have the Urim V'Tumim, therefore they went out to battle without the Urim V'Tumim. V'tzarech iyun, he says, I don't understand what Rabbeinu Yonah is talking about. They came into Urim V'Tumim havyon. If there's a din that you have to get rishus from Urim V'Tumim, and without Urim V'Tumim there's no milchama, so ma me'ol hadolek Urim V'Tumim? Well, what do you gain? So there's no Urim V'Tumim.
You can't go to battle.
Oh, he says, since the halacha is that bebayis sheni milvad chisarn Urim V'Tumim bechetimtza, od hufka shela v'Urim V'Tumim al pidin, Hadi Urim V'Tumim ha'keves milchama hu rak bizman de'ika chova v'chalos kiyum din she'ela b'Urim V'Tumim u'bebayis sheni deleka din she'ela ha'Urim V'Tumim einu makvim klal. He says a fantastic chiddush over here. He says that if Urim V'Tumim is a question of Heichetimsa, in reality, I don't know if I can use the Urim V'Tumim, I can avail myself of its powers, ask a question and get an answer. So if the halacha is, I need the rishus from the Urim V'Tumim, here in Bayesheni I can't achieve that goal, how can I go after Mulchama? But if the answer is no, that when there is a din of She'elah, meaning when the Torah says, here's the Urim V'Tumim, ask the question to the Urim V'Tumim, that's your responsibility, then I have to do so as a fulfillment of my obligation before I go out to Milchama. That question and answer that I asked the Urim V'Tumim is a precondition in the license that I have to fight this battle. But since we're saying now that during Bayesheni, and the Rambam quotes the pasuk for this, there's a hafkah of the din of Urim V'Tumim. It's not just an issue that you know, it would be futile to ask, but that the whole din she'ela, as far as the Urim V'Tumim is completely gone, it's undermined, then in such a case, there's no din of Urim V'Tumim. And if there's no din of Urim V'Tumim, I don't need the Urim V'Tumim in order to get permission and license to go out to Milcham. That I thought was very, very fascinating. Take a look at the fifth source on your page, all the way at the bottom of page 1, a Gemara in Makos. The Gemara in Makos establishes that if I lend you money, and I don't specify how much time you have until payment is due, then stam mil v'shloshim yom. Then the assumption is that we give you 30 days to pay back the loan. I can't claim, I, the malva, the lender, I can't claim from the borrower, you have to pay me back until 30 days elapse. The Gemara says, Mina ha milsa. What's the source for this statement? The Amar Rabbana malvas chaver stam. If you extend the loan without stipulating, eino rashai l'tovo pachos milamed yom. You cannot collect it less than 30 days. Echad mil b'shtar, echad mil balpeh. Whether it's recorded in a document or whether it's an oral loan. So the Gemara answers the Ksiv, Karva shnas hasheva shnas hashmita. This is a pasuk that appears in the law of what's called Shmitas Ksafim, that every 7 years debts are null and void when Shmitas Ksafim applies. Mimashma shenemar Karva shnas hasheva eni yodeh shnas shmita. There's a certain redundancy in the pasuk. It says Karva shnas hashmita. Why did it have to say that? It already says shnas hasheva. Elamat hamalom shnas hashmita. Lomer l'cha yesh shmita acheres shehi kizu. There's another shmita that also breaks up debts and makes it impossible to collect the debt. The ezo. And the Rambam quotes this lahalacha, this sugya, In Perek Yud Gimel, Halacha Hey, Mehilchus Malvalov, the Rambam writes, Hamalves Chaver v'Kavalo Zman Leparo, Ein Yochlu Tova at Sofa Zman. Ustam Milva, if he doesn't stipulate, Shloshim Yom is 30 days. Then the Rambam adds, listen carefully, a very strange sentence. He says, V'im Hisna, if he made a condition, Sheyitba B'chol Zman Sheyirtze, that he allows himself, the lender allows himself the permission to demand the payment at any time he wishes. Yeshlo litovo biyomo. He can even demand it on the very same day he lent it. Shetnai mamanhu. Because this condition is a monetary condition. What does that mean, this is a monetary condition? See, you can't change the law by creating a condition if that law applies, let's say, for example, to issues, to marriage. You can't say, well, Haret Mekudeshesli, Al Menashem Lachalai, Ona, and change the law. But here says the Rambam, you can change the law because it's a T'nai Shebamon. When it's a T'nai Shebamon, it's monetary law, then the halacha allows you flexibility to change the law. For example, there's something called a shomer sachar. He gets paid, and therefore he has a higher responsibility level. But let's say I can make it tonight. I'll pay you to do the shmir, but your law will be the same as a shomer chinam, as if I didn't pay you. That's called the t'nai shebamon. So I have here in front of me also a rare kind of sefer. It's not so rare, but this is called the Brisk on the Rambam. And he writes the fine, he says, Tzarech Iyun, he doesn't understand. Hoda Hosef HaRambam, Taima Shetnai Shebamomenu, Mashma Debi Din T'nai Hu Dekasin in Allah. The Rambam is applying the laws of T'nai. He says, I don't understand. What do you need T'nai for? Stam Milvish Shloshim Yom. If he doesn't say anyway, otherwise, then we assume he's giving him for 30 days. But if he says he wants to be Tovem within the 30 days, so that it's not a Stam Milveh. Why does the Ram have to go into this whole discussion about T'nai? He made it T'nai, and it's a T'nai Shabamon, and calls it T'nai Shabamon Kayim. He says, Hanira Mavur Midivrei Rambam. What do we see from this Rambam? Da'adin dil shloshim yom ein ze rak b'stoma. B'stoma al v'asu al shloshim yom. It's not just that we assume that the psychology of a lender is that he won't collect the loan within 30 days. Ki im yisodahu din Torah. It's a halachic legal status. B'chol halvos, the ad shloshim yom eino yochel utovo. That up until 30 days, the Torah says you can't force the borrower to pay the loan. That's halach, that's a din. It's not just a echatimtza. It's not just an umdun. It's not just a psychological assumption on our part. But that's how the Torah formulates the laws of halva. And where did the Rambam know it from? Kidi alfidin lo b'makis. He quotes our Gemara that we started with. Mikra, the krov shnas hashiva, hasheva shnas hashmita. Yesh shmita acher shikazu. V'ezo zuhi milva, malvas chaver stam, she'enu rashel utova, b'poks mishloshim yom. Im ken yisod dina hu gzeras hakos. This is the legal legislation of the Torah. B'chol alvos, she'enu rashel utova, b'poks mishloshim yom. V'zeu dekosi harama midin t'nai, v't'nai shemam kayim. She'ushtan din zeh. In other words, he's coming to change the din. If it was only halacha that we assume that since he didn't say otherwise, he probably meant 30 days, that's psychology. If I lend you money, I'm going to give it to you for at least 30 days. Then if he comes along and says, no, I want to collect it earlier, I don't need din tonight. The whole Mistama falls apart. Our assumption was incorrect. Why does the Rambam need to operate me din tonight? Because the halacha of 30 days in a loan is a halacha which was legislated by the Torah. It's a din. It's exeris hakosov. And how does the Rambam know such a thing? Because the Gemara Makis quotes a pasuk. Just like there's a din of Shemitah that comes the 7th year and it breaks up the loan, so too there's a miniature Shemitah of 30 days that says that you have no rights over the loan until after the 30 days.
Sorry, how do we get 30 from this? I don't know.
You're right. That's an excellent question. I mean, the Torah doesn't say 30. Yeah. It says Yesh Lecha Shemitah Acheres. But how long is it? Yeah. Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it a year? Yeah. So you're right. The psychology is given up to the Chachamim in order to define what the Torah means by Shemitah. It's one of those complicated cases where the Torah says something stama, meaning in a kind of undefined, unspecified way, and it authorized the Chachamim to tell you exactly how and when. So let's just give an overview, a quick summary of what we covered tonight. I think all told, if my calculation is correct, we covered 4 sugyas. The big sugya you'll see in the middle of page 1, we didn't get up to. We started a little late tonight, so I apologize for that. But we did cover a bunch of sugyas. So let's just quickly cap them, just an overview. Number 1, we were wondering about a bar test. If it's only 9 tfachim and the animal dies when it falls in the bar, what do we say? Do we say that the reason why the owner of the bar is relieved of responsibility paying damages is because the animal didn't die as a result of the bar, it died for other reasons? Or are we saying, no, the halacha is that this is the way the Torah sets up a bar. The halacha says that a bar test is not chayiv for misas hasham. So then we're wavering back and forth. Is it a mitzias echetimtza or is it a din? The second sugya that we discussed was about mizigas hakos. When we add water to wine, concentrated wine, what is it? Is it just to set up wine, or is it a halacha? There's a kiyum, there's a din of miziga, and the difference would be on the night of the seder whether or not we should wait till Lila to do the miziga. Number 3, we spoke about Urim V'Tumim during Bayis Sheni. Is it just that the question to the Urim V'Tumim would be futile because we don't have the capability, the vehicle, the Ruach HaKodesh to get an answer? Or is it a separate din that the Urim V'Tumim are completely mufka, completely excluded according to the halacha from the whole parsha of Sheila? With an afkamina l'gabi whether we could go out to Milchama. And finally, we did the sugi of Stam Mil V'Shloshim Yom, the Gemara Makis Daf Gimel, and the question was whether or not we're saying something psychological about the assumption, the umdana, that we evaluate the mindset of the lender when he gave a loan, that he didn't want to collect it, didn't expect it to be paid within 30 days, or did the Torah set up this new din? It's not just the mitzvah, it's not just the chetimtza. Above and beyond the psychology, the Torah said there's a shmita halacha. Shmot. Shmot means pick up your hands, don't try to demand payment from the lova until after the 30-day period. From the fact that the Rambam utilized the halacha of Tanai, that's how we proved that it's a din. Okay then? So we'll stop here.